Welcome to this video. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for Lightroom Classic, and in particular focusing on the Develop module. I've also created some tips and tricks in another video which were around the importing and ranking of images into Lightroom Classic, and I'll put a link above to that video. So let's get started. Let's get into the Develop module. I've picked this photo. It's one of a boardwalk local to me. It's slightly askew. There's some issues with it, so we'll really focus the tips and tricks and show you how we can quickly get this image under control. So let's start with tip 1, which is really focused around using some of the increasingly powerful automation tools that have been built into Lightroom Classic. I used to start by going through the basics panel and starting to adjust my exposure, adjust my contrast. You'll see here that with my Nikon D7, which I took this image on, it's automatically brought in a profile from the camera. What you'll also find is there's this auto button here. And one of the advances with Lightroom Classic recently is actually this auto button will give you a really good baseline to start from. Don't feel bad about using some of the inbuilt automation that Lightroom provides. You don't have to use it as a final point. You can use it as a starting point. So if we click on auto, you'll see it's lifted the image quite considerably already. And as I said, we can use that as a baseline. Let's go back a step using Control Z there. Another way of doing this is we're all quite used to, perhaps if you double click on a slider, it brings it back to the central position. If you hold down Shift and double click on a slider, what you'll find is that it automatically sets it to where Lightroom Classic thinks the slider should be. So that's an alternative way if you perhaps didn't like what auto gave you. So we've got our baseline image perhaps created using the auto functionality within Lightroom Classic. And we now want to start moving some of the sliders to perhaps bring the image towards what we were looking, or we had the vision we had for that image. So you can move the sliders obviously and see what's going on. One way that's quite useful with a lot of these sliders particularly in the tone area, is that if you hold down Alt on a Windows or Option on a Mac while you're dragging these sliders, what it will do is create an overlay, and you can see, for example, the highlights where you're getting to the edge where some of the image is perhaps blowing out there. You can see it appearing. The same with the shadows. As you drag it down, you can see the impact that is having. So using it in collaboration with perhaps just moving the sliders around without the overlay can really help you understand, particularly with things like the white point, where the white point is having an effect where you're perhaps pulling it over the edge of that white point. Equally, the third tip is around the histogram and something similar with that black and white point. You can see here that the triangle on the shadows end of the histogram is showing that the blues are perhaps losing some of their definition. What we can do is, if you move over the triangle with your mouse, you can start to see that down here, you'll see around here the area that is impacted. If you click on that triangle, you can start to see that if we bring the blacks down, you can see the impact of the areas that you're perhaps losing the definition in. So we can really use that to fine-tune where we put our black point. It's the same with the white point. You can move the whites, and you can see there that the clouds are the first area to blow out. So a couple of really useful tips and tricks there, really around how do you find the edge to make sure you don't overcook some of the sliders and some of the settings within Lightroom. So our fourth tip is around something that is so obvious in a lot of images and really undermines the quality of those images, but is so easy to correct, and that's about getting your horizon level. I picked this image obviously because it's got a horizon that is very much off of level. So if we go into the crop tool within Lightroom Classic, there's a number of ways that Lightroom can help us get the horizon straight. The first one is there's an auto button. Again, if we click on auto, you can see it's done a pretty good job of straightening up the horizon on this. If we go back The second way you can approach this is, again, if you hold down Shift and double click on the angle slider, it's leveled it up. And then the final one, if we want to do it slightly more manual, you can click on the spirit level and we could perhaps pick this area here, hold down the left mouse button, drag the line across, and there we go. Again, it's leveled it up. So that's 3 ways that Lightroom Classic can really help you create that level horizon. It doesn't have to be just a horizontal, a horizon. We can use the spirit level tip there. If you had perhaps the edge of a building you wanted to be vertical, so let's imagine this tree is that building. Again, you drag the line to where you want it to be, let go, and Lightroom has brought the image into alignment with what you wanted there. For our 5th tip, we're going to stick with the crop tool, because within the crop tool there's quite a lot of support that's there in plain sight around helping us with our composition. You'll see that my crop tool is set up to have the guidelines on the rule of thirds. However, if while you're in the crop tool you go up to Tools, Crop Guide Overlay, you can choose the overlay that suits your style most. So if we come out, I've got it set to the rule of thirds. If I press the O button, it actually scrolls through the different options. So I've got the rule of thirds, we've got diagonal, triangle, we've got the golden ratio and the golden spiral, we've got different aspect ratios, so you can look at what the image would look like if it was a 4:5, a 5:7 or a 2:3, and then we've got a grid, and then we're back to the rule of thirds. Now if you press X in here, you move the crop tool between the different orientations, but what you can actually do is, if we go to perhaps the golden spiral and we press Shift O, you can see we can move the golden spiral to fit the image we have on our screen. So there's quite a lot of functionality in here to really help you think about composition and how your images can fit into those compositional guides. So we like to give you something extra, so here's a bonus tip. One of the things you'll have seen down the side here is you've got quite a lot of menus from Basic, Tone Curve, HSL. There's a lot of functionality to move these up and down within Lightroom. But one of the things that I find quite useful is sometimes I used to find that actually you have to scroll up and down the different menus. There is a setting here though that I normally have set called Solo Mode. So if you right click in the panel and click Solo Mode, what you find is when you click on Basic, the Basic panel opens. You then click on Tone Curve and it closes the Basic and opens the Tone Curve. So it will only ever have one panel open at any one time, and this can just make it so much more manageable, and it's a really small piece of automation but that can make your life a lot easier, especially when you're starting out in Lightroom Classic. So that's 6 tips and tricks around the Develop module. I hope you found that useful. I've done a second video focusing in on the importing and ranking of images within Lightroom, and I'll put the cards somewhere on the screen about now. I hope you found that useful and it helps you speed up your processing and become more efficient in your use of Lightroom Classic. If you've got some tips and tricks that we haven't covered today, put them in the comments below. It'd be great to share those and go on a bit of a learning journey together on this. And I hope to see you soon in another video.